In this episode, I want to talk about one thing that you can do relatively quickly, whether you're an aspiring manager, aspiring to be an executive, um, you're a new executive, new to an organization, or new to the position, or even a veteran executive that you can do that will help increase profits and definitely will help with engagement of employees. Now, most organizations I walk into are designed to have edicts that come from the hierarchy on down. And it has to do, and I've talked about this ad nauseum, that these edicts that come from executives are really harmful to the organization. And it's not easy to get out of that. Most organizations, as I mentioned, are designed this way. Uh, but they come in the form of things like, you'll be familiar with them, objectives, targets, policies, rules, scripts, and the list can go on and on. And these things are not conducive to engagement. Or, as it turns out, they're harmful really to profit. And so, how do you get away from these things? And I think one small step, because whenever I have conversations, people uh, put me on their calendar. I do a 30-minute get to know you type of thing. They'll say, what can I do right now? Is there something I can do immediately to help transition from being this edict driven hierarchy type environment to being something where employees are more involved in making decisions? Now, obviously, one of the things is in the 95 method, you start out and you study your organization customer in, and we'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. But uh, one thing you can do today, I send executives off to do, and it's kind of almost a commitment thing. Will they do it? Because if they're not going to do that, they're probably not going to study their organization customer in, because it's more involved. Um, but the thing that you're trying to achieve is you want to get to the point where workers are controlling their own work, and that makes them responsible and not just accountable. Now, I have it's actually a pretty good video about being responsible versus being accountable. And there was the story of a Finnish school system that had visitors from the U.S. to see how they were conducting their education system, because they were having a lot of success in their education system. And one of the things they said is that you make people responsible. And the U.S. people were kind of like, well, let's make them accountable. And the people from Finland education systems basically said, I don't know what accountable means. And after some conversation, they said, well, accountability is what's left after you take responsibility away. And I think that this kind of explains the transition from being this edict driven type of organizations, this mindset around making people accountable, to the edicts that you're putting in front of them. But this doesn't make them responsible. And so one way to achieve responsibility fairly easily is listening to ideas. And there's more to it than just listening to ideas of workers, and that is it's having them share their ideas with a team. Make them visual. If in other words, that it's being written down where everybody can see it. And then executing trials. Now, remember, I'm an advocate of, if you're going to try something new, do it on a very small scale. You don't need to blow up the whole system, and see what you learn. Was it wind up being something that people want to continue, and it's not necessarily something for you to judge. It would be for the people that are involved in the trial. And then you can kind of begin to expand it if you think it's a good idea. There's always unintended consequences when you haven't first, well, even when you study an organization customer in, there will always be some unintended consequences. But, let the workers pick the ideas or the improvements or the innovation that they believe have promise in their organization. But don't just dismiss anything that anybody says. And this is something then that you want to build into your system right from the very beginning. So in other words, when a new employee comes in, remember they have a lot of enthusiasm about starting a new company in most cases. And so you want to start this process from day one. At the end of their first day, what did they see, and even setting up as they enter, what are you seeing? What isn't working in this system? And it could even be go back to when, they were first interviewed. From that standpoint, you can get a lot of good feedback from employees as an executive by, saying, hey, we're interested in these things that you're running into. We don't know, maybe that one new hire had a problem that's very unique. In that case, you don't need to change the whole system. But if you're starting to hear the same things over and over again about the hiring process, or in many cases the training process, starts to generate the fact that you're interested in learning more about how to improve the system that they're going to be operating in as a new hire. And you can set this tone, and it's part of the learning for an employee. In other words, you might hear something and say, oh, well, that's because they're a new employee. They don't really understand that. But one of the things then you want to do in your training is obviously make sure that they understand why you're doing something in a certain way, rather than just follow the script or follow the rule or the policy or whatever it is. That depth of understanding helps get people more engaged in the organization, and it actually improves your training, over time. And so the mantra should be, question everything. As a new hire, as an employee, we're interested in the input, and just transitioning to that will help you move from this edict-driven type of environment, top-down hierarchical decision making, and making people accountable, to helping them become responsible for the work that they're doing. And so one of the things I talked about earlier was, the missing ingredient here ultimately is that you need knowledge of the system for everyone that's operating in it. How do they connect to the customer? Studying the organization customer in can be done relatively quickly, and you can build it into your organization. And that's actually the executive education program that I have available for executives to go through. But it's not just for executives, right? It's for everyone to set up, understanding the organization, customer in. It gives people a unique perspective. And it's really the foundational step of everything I do in the 95 method. In other words, if you understand your system better, then you're going to make better decisions. You're going to have better measures. You're going to understand that the customer sets the target, as I talked about previously in a previous episode, that those are things that become really foundational to building in this responsibility, because employees then get a flavor of what the system is made up of, what customers require of the organization. They can be participants rather than minions that you're placing edicts on them, over time. So that's what I wanted to cover this week. And remember, there is always a better way.